Have you ever faced moments when your own strength seemed to turn into weaknesses? The story of Samson is a powerful reflection on how courage, choices, and redemption shape our lives. In this video, we'll explore Samson's complete journey, from his miraculous birth to his ultimate sacrifice. Discover how a man gifted with supernatural strength faced internal and external challenges, troubled loves, and ultimately found redemption. Get ready for an emotional journey that reveals timeless lessons about perseverance, faith, and the power of second chances. But before we start, that request you already know. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like, so I know this content is relevant to you. That said, let's get to the story of Samson. In a time of great turmoil and suffering for the people of Israel, the Philistines dominated the land, imposing their strength and power over the Israelites. It was an era of oppression, where hope seemed to fade in the face of the constant threat from enemies. In this desolate scenario, the story of Samson begins to unfold in extraordinary ways, bringing with it a promise of liberation and renewal. Samson's parents, Manoah and his wife, lived in a small village in the region of Zorah. They were known for their devotion to God but carried a deep sorrow in their hearts. They were barren. Infertility left them desolate, yearning for a child who could bring joy and hope into their lives. Seasons passed without their prayers being answered, and doubt and sadness threatened to shake their faith. One night, while Manoah fervently prayed in the temple of God, seeking an answer to his anguish, a divine messenger appeared before him. It was an angel of the Lord, whose presence radiated light and serenity. Manoah, filled with fear and reverence, knelt before the angel, unsure of what to expect. "Do not be afraid, Manoah, for God has come to you. Your wife will bear a son, and you shall call him Samson. He shall be a Nazirite from the womb. From birth, he will be dedicated to God." The angel continued, detailing the conditions of the Nazirite vow that Samson should follow. "He shall not drink wine or any strong drink, nor shall he become unclean by touching dead bodies. His hair shall never be cut, for the Lord's strength will be with him as long as this vow is maintained." Manoah and his wife were amazed and filled with hope. They understood that the birth of Samson would not only be a personal blessing, but also a sign that God was still attentive to the suffering of his people. The promise of a liberator brought a new light to those dark days, filling them with renewed expectation and faith. Months passed and Manoah's wife conceived, bringing relief and joy to the couple. When the time came, Samson's birth was celebrated with great reverence. From the very first moment, it was evident that he was different. His eyes sparkled with an unusual determination, and his presence radiated a strength that transcended the physical. From childhood, Samson was raised under the strict precepts of the Nazirite vow. His parents ensured that he followed God's commandments, avoiding anything that could compromise him. Samson's early dedication not only shaped his character, but also prepared the ground for the challenges and triumphs that lay ahead. The story of Samson's birth is more than just a biblical account. It is a testament to divine intervention in times of despair. It is the narrative of how, even in the most adverse circumstances, God chooses an individual to fulfill his purposes and bring hope to an oppressed people. Samson, the dedicated Nazirite, was born to be the strength that would break the chains of Philistine oppression, initiating a journey of power, weakness, and redemption that would leave an indelible mark on the history of Israel. This initial story invites us to reflect on God's plans and how he chooses and prepares those who, despite adversities, are destined to play crucial roles in his grand narrative. Samson, from his miraculous birth, was already destined to be an instrument of liberation, demonstrating that with faith and dedication, even the most unlikely can become great heroes. After the miraculous birth of Samson, his family and the entire community of Zorah understood that he was destined for a special purpose. From a very young age, it was clear that Samson would not be an ordinary child. To ensure that he fulfilled his divine destiny, his parents, Manoah and his wife, strictly followed the instructions given by the angel of the Lord. They committed themselves to raise Samson as a Nazirite, a sacred vow of total dedication to God. The most striking aspect of Samson's vow was undoubtedly his long hair. While others in the community could cut their hair as they pleased, Samson kept his hair long at all times. This seemingly simple detail had a profound and practical meaning. It was the source of his extraordinary strength. Each strand of hair represented the continuous presence of God in his life, granting him superhuman abilities that would be essential for facing future challenges. Samson's dedication to the Nazirite vow made him an extraordinary man. He possessed impressive physical strength, capable of feats that surpassed human limits. From toppling walls to defeating wild animals with his bare hands, Samson repeatedly demonstrated that his strength was a divine gift, intended to protect and liberate his people. This supernatural strength was not only a blessing, but also a strategic tool against the Philistines, the oppressors of Israel. Each act of bravery by Samson served to inspire his people and weaken the enemy's confidence. His physical strength symbolized his dedication to God, and each victory was seen as confirmation that God was still present and active in the fight for Israel's freedom. In addition to his physical strength, the Nazirite vow also granted Samson spiritual integrity. He was separated from the impurities of the world, maintaining purity in thought and action. This inner purity allowed him to stay focused on his mission, resisting the temptations and challenges that would arise along his path. Through his Nazirite vow, Samson learned the importance of discipline, faith, and obedience to God. Each day of his life was a reaffirmation of his commitment, strengthening him both physically and spiritually. This unwavering dedication shaped Samson into a natural leader, ready to face his people's enemies with courage and determination. The story of Samson's Nazirite vow is a testimony to how faith and dedication can transform an ordinary person into an extraordinary hero. It serves as a reminder that, with the right commitment and divine guidance, even the most difficult challenges can be overcome. Samson's strength, both physical and spiritual, was a living expression of his connection with God, enabling him to fulfill his destiny of liberating Israel from Philistine oppression. Samson, since his oath as a Nazirite, was prepared to be the force that would break the chains of oppression, beginning a journey of challenges and triumphs that would inspire generations to come. From a young age, Samson showed signs of his extraordinary strength, but it was during a journey to Timnah that this strength was revealed in impressive ways. While walking through the vineyards on his way to meet a Philistine woman he wished to marry, a strong young lion suddenly appeared from the vines, roaring and charging toward him. With no weapon in hand and no time to flee, Samson felt the Spirit of the Lord fill him with power. With supernatural courage and strength, he grabbed the lion and tore it apart with his own hands as if it were a young goat. This feat not only saved his life but also served as a sign of God's presence with him. However, Samson did not tell anyone about the incident, not even his parents. Days later, while passing by the same place, he found the carcass of the lion and noticed that a swarm of bees had made honey inside it. Samson took some of the honey, ate it, and brought some to his parents, without revealing where it came from. This event inspired Samson to propose a riddle during the banquet of his wedding to the Philistine woman. He challenged the 30 Philistine guests. Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came sweetness. If you can solve this riddle within the 7 days of the feast, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. Unable to solve the riddle, the Philistines pressured Samson's wife to find out the answer, threatening her and her family. After much insistence, Samson yielded to his wife's pleas and revealed the secret, which she immediately told her people. On the 7th day before sunset, the men of the city answered, "What is sweeter than honey and what is stronger than a lion?" Realizing he had been betrayed, Samson became furious and declared, "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle." Consumed by rage and feeling wronged, Samson went down to Ashkelon, a Philistine city, and killed 30 men, taking their garments to pay for the wager of the riddle. This act of revenge marked the beginning of an open conflict between Samson and the Philistines. Upon returning, he discovered that his wife had been given in marriage to another man, which further fueled his anger. Determined to take revenge on the Philistines, Samson devised a strategic attack. He captured 300 foxes, tied them in pairs by their tails, and fastened torches to their backs. Releasing the foxes in the fields of the Philistines during the harvest season, he ignited a massive fire that destroyed wheat crops, vineyards, and olive groves. The devastation was immense, causing significant economic harm to the Philistines. This confrontation significantly increased the Philistines' animosity toward Samson. He was no longer just seen as a man of unusual strength, but as a serious threat to Philistine rule over Israel. Samson's determination to fight Philistine oppression and his acts of courage inspired the Israelite people, but also set the stage for even more intense conflicts in the future. The Philistines, upon seeing the devastation, were in shock and fury. Who did this? They asked each other, trying to understand the origin of such calamity. Soon they discovered that Samson was responsible. It was because of his wife, who was given to another man, they said. In retaliation, the Philistines sought to punish those they believed were the cause of their misfortune. They went to the house of the father of the woman from Timnah, and in a cruel act burned him along with his daughter. The news of this tragedy reached Samson, who was filled with deep sorrow and even greater rage. "Since you have acted this way," he declared, "I will not rest until I have avenged you." Samson attacked the Philistines with great ferocity, causing significant slaughter. His strikes were precise and deadly, and his strength seemed inexhaustible. Fearing Samson's wrath, the Philistines mobilized an army to capture him. They gathered and camped in Judah, pressuring the men of the region to deliver Samson to them. Alarmed by the presence of the Philistines in their territory, 3,000 men from Judah went to the rock of Etam, where Samson had taken refuge. "Do you not know that the Philistines rule over us?" they asked. "Why have you brought this trouble upon us? We have come to bind you and deliver you to the Philistines." Samson calmly replied, "Swear to me that you will not kill me." They agreed. "We will not kill you, but we will bind you and deliver you to them." Samson allowed them to bind him with new ropes, and together they descended from the rock. As they approached the Philistine camp, the enemy soldiers advanced with shouts of triumph, believing they had finally captured their greatest enemy. But at that moment, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon Samson. The ropes that bound his arms became like burnt linen threads, and the bonds fell from his hands. With no weapon in sight, Samson spotted the carcass of a donkey and picked up the fresh jawbone of the animal. With it in hand, he charged at the Philistines. The battlefield became an impressive scene of strength and skill. Samson, alone, faced 1,000 armed men, defeating them one by one with the jawbone of the donkey. "With the jawbone of a donkey I have made heaps of them," Samson exclaimed after his victory. "With the jawbone of a donkey I killed 1,000 men." His feat not only thwarted the plans of the Philistines, but also solidified his reputation as an invincible warrior. Exhausted and thirsty after the battle, Samson cried out to the Lord, "You have granted this great victory to your servant. Am I now to die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?" God heard his cry and opened a cavity in the rock, from which water gushed forth. Samson drank, regained his strength, and named that place En-Hakkore. This resounding victory spread throughout the region. The Israelites, who had previously been fearful, felt encouraged by Samson's strength. The Philistines, on the other hand, were stunned and frightened. The legend of Samson grew, and his figure became synonymous with power and resilience. However, this series of events also intensified the Philistines' hatred for Samson. They realized that they could not easily subjugate him and began to devise more cunning ways to defeat him. The battle between Samson and the Philistines was far from over, and future confrontations would be even more challenging. After many battles and conflicts with the Philistines, Samson continued to be a feared and respected figure. His fame as a man of unmatched strength spread throughout the region. However, despite his physical strength, Samson was a man like any other, with desires, dreams, and a heart longing for love and companionship. One day, while walking through the valley of Sorek, an area known for its lush vineyards and stunning landscapes, Samson encountered a woman who immediately captured his attention. Her name was Delilah. With deep eyes and a captivating smile, she possessed a beauty that enchanted everyone around her. There was something about her that awakened feelings in Samson that he had not experienced in a long time. As they got to know each other, Samson and Delilah began to share moments together, walking through the fields, talking under the stars, and laughing at the little things in life. Delilah seemed to understand Samson in a way that few could. She listened attentively to his stories, his achievements, and even his sorrows. Samson felt a connection with her, allowing the walls around his heart to begin to fall. However, what Samson did not know was that the Philistine leaders were watching closely. They knew Delilah's reputation and saw her as an opportunity. Determined to discover the secret of Samson's strength, they approached her with a tempting offer. "Each of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver," they said, "if you find out the secret of his strength and reveal it to us." Delilah faced a dilemma. On one hand, there was the promise of wealth and favor among her people. On the other, there was Samson, who devoted genuine affection to her. After contemplating, temptation spoke louder, and she agreed to help the Philistine leaders. On a tranquil night, as the moon softly illuminated the valley, Delilah decided to begin her mission. With a gentle voice, she approached Samson and asked, "Please tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up so that someone can dominate you." Samson, sensing her curious tone, playfully replied, "If you tie me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I will lose my strength and be like any other man." That night, while Samson slept, Delilah quietly tied him up with the strings. Then she shouted, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He awoke and broke the strings as if they were threads, thwarting the attempt. Delilah, feigning disappointment, said, "You have made a fool of me, you lied to me. Now please tell me how you can be tied." Still relaxed, Samson replied, "If you bind me with new ropes that have never been used, I will lose my strength." Once again, Delilah tied him up while he slept and shouted, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." And again, he easily broke the ropes. Persistent, Delilah insisted, "So far you have deceived and lied to me. Tell me how you can be tied." Samson said, "If you weave the 7 braids of my head into the fabric of the loom and fasten it with a pin, I will become weak." Delilah then wove Samson's braids into the fabric and shouted, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He awoke and pulled out the loom, freeing himself effortlessly. By this point, Delilah was frustrated and desperate. "How can you say you love me if you do not trust me?" she questioned, tears in her eyes. "You have humiliated me 3 times and have not told me the secret of your great strength." Day after day, she pestered him with her words and insistence until Samson, tired, decided to open his heart. "No razor has ever been used on my head," he confessed. "I am a Nazirite, dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head is shaved, I will lose my strength and be as weak as any other man." Seeing that she had finally obtained the truth, Delilah sent a message to the Philistine leaders. "This time he has told me everything. Come back once more." That night, after Samson fell asleep in her lap, Delilah called for a man to cut the 7 braids of his hair. With each lock that fell, Samson's strength diminished. When she finished, she shouted, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." Samson woke up thinking he could free himself as he had done before. But to his surprise and horror, he realized that his strength had abandoned him. The Philistines invaded the room, seized him, and bound him. They shackled him with bronze chains and took him to Gaza, where he was forced to work grinding grain in prison. Delilah, with her heart torn between guilt and satisfaction at having fulfilled her agreement, watched as Samson was taken away. The wealth she received could not fill the void left by the betrayal. The story does not record anything further about Delilah after this event, but her name became synonymous with betrayal throughout the centuries. After being betrayed by Delilah and captured by the Philistines, Samson faced a cruel and humiliating fate at the hands of his enemies. The Philistines, exultant with the capture of the man who had tormented them so much, decided to punish him exemplarily to demonstrate their power and weaken the morale of the Israelites. Without mercy, they gouged out Samson's eyes, leaving him completely blind. The one who once saw far and was feared for his keen vision in battle was now plunged into total darkness. This blindness was not only physical, but also symbolic. It reflected the spiritual blindness that Samson experienced as he strayed from God's paths and relied on his own strength. After blinding him, the Philistines took Samson to Gaza, one of the major Philistine cities, where they shackled him with bronze chains. The heavy chains bit into his wrists and ankles, restricting his movements and constantly reminding him of his new condition as a prisoner. The man who had once broken cords and chains as if they were threads was now subjugated by the weight of cold metal. In prison, Samson was forced to work grinding grain. This arduous and repetitive task was usually reserved for the lowest slaves or even animals. The work consisted of pushing a large millstone in endless circles, transforming grain into flour. Each turn represented not only physical effort, but also the humiliation of someone chosen by God to lead, now reduced to such a degrading state. Day after day, Samson walked in circles, pushing the millstone under the scorching sun or in the cold darkness of the night. Without vision, he depended on others to guide him to the mill, but once there, he was alone with his thoughts. In this forced silence, Samson had plenty of time to reflect on his choices and the paths that had led him to this point. He remembered his childhood, the promises made by his parents, and the Nazirite vow that set him apart for God's service. He recalled his victories over the Philistines, his unmatched strength, and how he had trusted more in himself than in God. He thought of Delilah and how his passion and impulsiveness had blinded him to her true intentions. Now, without sight and without strength, Samson understood the depth of his downfall. However, even in this state of humiliation, there was a spark of hope. The hair that Delilah had cut began to grow back. The Philistines, confident that his strength had vanished forever, did not pay attention to this detail. But for Samson, every inch of hair that grew was a reminder of the vow he had made and the possibility of reconciliation with God. After months of humiliation and suffering in Philistine prison, Samson continued to turn the millstone, grinding grain day after day. The darkness of his blindness was accompanied by the weight of his guilt and regret. Without the vision that once guided him in battles and adventures, Samson was forced to look within himself. In this isolation, he began to reflect on his choices, his mistakes, and the purpose that God had for his life. The silence of the nights in prison was interrupted only by the distant sound of Philistine celebrations. Samson could hear the laughter and music echoing through the streets, knowing that many of these parties were in celebration of his capture. The Philistines believed that their god, Dagon, had granted them victory over the mighty judge of Israel. This idea tormented Samson, as he knew that his defeat was the consequence of his own actions and his turning away from God. One night, amid silent prayers, Samson acknowledged his human frailty and the sovereignty of God. "Lord," he whispered, "I was foolish to trust in my own strength and forget about you. I ask for your forgiveness for my mistakes and implore you to give me a chance to redeem myself." This moment of deep humility marked the beginning of his reconciliation with God. Meanwhile, the Philistines were planning a grand celebration in honor of Dagon. The temple dedicated to their god would be the stage for a magnificent festival, gathering leaders, nobles, and a crowd of spectators. They wanted to thank Dagon for the defeat of Samson and reaffirm Dagon's supremacy over the God of Israel. On the day of the celebration, the temple was filled with people. In the upper terrace, about 3,000 men and women gathered to watch the events below. The atmosphere was one of euphoria and pride. Amid the songs and sacrifices, someone had the idea to bring Samson out to entertain the crowd. "Bring the one who has caused us so much suffering," they shouted. "Let Samson entertain us with his weakness." The guards went to the prison and brought Samson to the temple. Barefoot, dressed in rags, and guided by a young servant, he was led to the center of the hall. The crowd erupted in laughter and mockery upon seeing the once feared warrior now reduced to a frail and blind man. "Where is your strength now, Samson?" they jeered. "Your God has abandoned you." But Samson did not let their taunts affect him. Feeling God's presence in his heart, he murmured to the young man guiding him, "Please let me touch the pillars that support the temple, so I can lean against them." The young man, unaware of Samson's intentions, positioned him between the two main pillars. With his hands on the cold stone columns, Samson raised his blind face to the sky and offered a sincere prayer. "O sovereign Lord, remember me. O God, I ask you to strengthen me just this once more. May I take vengeance on the Philistines for my two eyes and fulfill the purpose you have given me." He then felt a surge of energy coursing through his body, a strength he had not experienced since losing his hair. It was as if the Spirit of the Lord was once again with him. The pressure of his hands against the columns gradually increased. The stones began to creak, and small fissures appeared at the bases of the columns. Samson, with all the strength God had given him, pushed the pillars with determination. "May I die with the Philistines," he exclaimed, completely surrendering to his fate. The columns gave way and the roof of the temple collapsed, crushing everyone inside and upon it. The destruction was complete. In that final act, Samson eliminated more enemies of his people than in all previous battles combined. His death was not in vain. It was a sacrifice that profoundly shook the Philistine power over Israel. The news of the temple's collapse and Samson's death spread quickly. The Israelites, upon learning what had happened, understood the magnitude of Samson's act. His family went to Gaza to recover his body from the rubble. With care and reverence, they took him back to his homeland and buried him in the tomb of his father Manoah. Samson's death marked the end of an intense era of oppression by the Philistines and inspired the people of Israel to unite against their enemies. Although his life was marked by failures and mistakes, his final act was a testament to redemption and the fulfillment of divine purpose. Samson turned to God in his darkest moment, and God heard him, granting him the strength to achieve one last heroic feat. The story of Samson teaches us about the consequences of straying from God's paths, but also about mercy and the possibility of redemption even after we have failed. His legacy endures as an example that, regardless of the circumstances, it is never too late to turn to God and seek to fulfill the purpose for which we were created. Write in the comments, I want to know what lessons you take from Samson's life in the Holy Bible. May God bless you abundantly. See you in the next video.